to the channel. I'm Dirk Guy here. I'd like to talk to you today about Chesapeake Bay. It's located on the east side of the United States and feeds into the Atlantic. Chesapeake Bay has been dying for years, and there's been billions and billions of dollars pumped into it to restore the bay, restore the bay. The biggest thing they've come up with so far, and this is what the science says, oysters. Oh my God, we got to put oysters everywhere. We need to plant new oyster bays and all these things. Do you have any idea how much water that an oyster filters? How many gallons per day that it filters? Uh, I like oysters. I like to eat them. But it's nonsense to think that oysters are the savior of the bay. That's friggin' ridiculous. It's stupid science, and there's a lot of people on board with it, and I'll tell you why. Because there are billions and billions of grant money being placed by different nonprofit organizations and whatever into the saving of the bay. But 90% of these people don't understand what killed the bay. And so they're not going to understand what's going to save it. Because if you take the heart out of an animal and it dies, you can't bring that animal back to life, no matter how much hair you put on it, or no matter how many kidneys you put inside of it. You have to put the heart back. And if you don't put the heart back, it's not going to live. Period. It's going to die. So what was it that happened to the bay? When did it happen? And why are we blaming the wrong things? That's the thing that really pisses me off. Is that right now we're blaming the farmers. We're blaming runoff. I've heard pig shit. I've heard, it's the cows, the cows, and it's all these horrible things. And that's all bullshit. It's all bullshit. The bay happened back in 1966. Our family moved in. I was 6 years old. Our family moved in to Cornfield Creek, which is off of the Magathie, which is just north of the Chesapeake Bay Bridge. So we moved in there, and let me tell you, that place had some challenges. The people there were awesome. The crabbers and commercial crabbers and the fishermen and stuff like that, great people. If you got to know them, they were fantastic. Now, a lot of the people that moved in down there at that time were coming from Baltimore, and they were coming from cities, and the two different people were different. One of them made their living off of the bay and the waterways, and the other one used the bay and the waterways for recreation. That was a problem at times. They butted heads from time to time. But as the populations grew, the more greedy, don't give a shit people moved in. And I'm not going to say that they didn't know. I'm going to say more like they didn't give a shit. We used to be able to soft crab. I would walk the shorelines for miles getting a bunch of soft crabs. I would bring them to some of the neighbors, and we were all friends, and everything was la-di-da. I would help my neighbors, and they liked me, and I fished and crabbed and had a little game fisher boat with a 6 horsepower Evinrude, and I thought I was a king of the creek. And right around the mid-70s, late 60s, mid-70s, so many people had moved down there that wanted a different life than being a waterman or respecting the bay and stuff like that. What they wanted was they wanted fast boats, they wanted sailboats, they wanted, recreation. They were there for recreation. They wanted to swim right off their pier, whatever it was they wanted. They wanted to do it, and they wanted it now. So there was all these arguments about what are we going to do about the seaweed. Because when I moved down there, seaweed was everywhere. If you went out in a boat with a prop on it, you stayed in the channels. Because if you got out of that clear channel and ran into that seaweed, it would clog your prop, and you'd have to get out and get your boat out of the seaweed and then get seaweed off your prop and then start going on your merry way again. So if you weren't paying attention and you just meandered into the seaweed, it was a big pain in the ass. And if you were some, city person with a donzi or, a fishing boat with, with a big old motor on it and all, and maybe a small cabin or something, and then all of a sudden you're not going anywhere because seaweed is literally tangled up your prop and choked your motor out. You had to get down there and go underneath the boat and with a knife or whatever you had to do, and you had to clear seaweed off of it in order to go forward again. And people struggle with that because of the type of lifestyle that they wanted to live, and where they moved didn't support that lifestyle at the time. So they start having all these community meetings and all this kind of nonsense. And I'm young, so I went to one meeting, and I remember a very respected person to me was Mr. Dalbert, who owned a bait and tackle shop at Mountain Road and Long Point Road. And it was Dalbert's Sporting Goods. And back then they sold guns and everything right at the counter. Didn't matter as long as you were over the age of 18. You come in and buy whatever the heck you wanted to buy. So some people started advertising that they can get rid of the seaweed, and some neighborhoods started paying them to do it. And they had these meetings, and they ended up paying these people to come and put herbicide in the water. And I watched an elderly man and woman row a rowboat all around our creek, throwing these small white tablets in the water. And took them an entire day, maybe 2 days to do it. I can't remember. But within a couple days, seaweed all turned yellow. And then it died. And it sunk to the bottom. And it turned the bottom of that creek into a black muck for like anywhere from 6 inches to 3 foot. I even remember some spots I would sink all the way up to my crotch, and we'd have to get somebody to get us out because we used to walk the shorelines for soft crabs all the time, and they killed the seaweed. And after they killed the seaweed, the donzies roared up and down the creeks, and yeah, they were happy, and people were skiing, and the sailboats were tacking all around the place, and it was cool. Life was good. Everybody was happy, blah, blah, blah. About 4 or 5 years later, start getting this news that there's some spots in the bay they're having some problems with, some spots in some of these creeks and rivers they're having some problems with because the oxygen levels were too low to support the life, and crabs were walking out of the water. And that was strange. Happened in our creek a couple times. It was weird because we could just walk around and dip crabs up. And next thing you know, there's a decline in some of the fish. Uh, Evidently, the seaweed used to stop a lot of the pollution because the shorelines used to be lined with these little weekend and summer cabins, and that was all through Long Point and up and down the Magathie, and there was all these little summer cabins, and people from Baltimore used to come, and different places, Pennsylvania and some from Virginia, and they would come up and they would stay in these cabins and all. And some of them only had like a 50-gallon drum for a septic system. Well, the seaweed thrived doing that kind of stuff. That was like fertilizer to the seaweed, and the seaweed was thick. So anything that ran from the edges didn't get far. It got clogged up in the filter of the seaweed. When they took the seaweed away, that stuff came out and actually got hard in the water and went wherever it wanted to go and did whatever it wanted to do. So scientists all start looking at this and they're like, oh, first they're blaming it on the people fishing. You're overfishing the bay. You're overfishing the bay. Some of these guys had to know that was a lie. They had to know it was a lie. I knew it was a lie, and I was young. I was in my teens by then. I knew it was a freaking lie. We weren't overfishing the bay because we used to fish it out. We used to bring a lot more fish than we're bringing now home. So I didn't know at the time what had done it, but I started learning, and I started thinking about stuff, and there was a little cove just outside of Cornfield Creek. As you entered the Magathie River, if you went left towards Gibson Island Harbor, there was a small cove there, and I remember that there was a man there with a shotgun who confronted the people in the rowboat and told them that cove was his. And if they came in the cove with those herbicides, he was going to shoot them. And he meant every word of it. He showed up on the shore with a shotgun. He threatened them. He flat out threatened them. Told them, I will shoot you if you enter my cove with that nonsense. So he kept all his seaweed, seagrass, everything that came along with it. He had it in that little cove. And years went by, and we used to have a lot of muskrat that would tear the shorelines up. My father didn't believe in bulkheads, and it was weird because I started installing bulkheads when I got old enough, and I got a bobcat, and I would jet bulkheads in and all that kind of stuff. But my dad didn't want one. But the muskrats were tearing up his shoreline really bad. So I got two 2x12s and put them on top of each other and made a tiny bulkhead just to stop his ground from being tore up by the muskrats, and then it would erode because they would dig these caves underneath, and then you'd step on them and they'd fall through, and it was nasty. So that's all we had on our place was that little two 2x12s. One of them was completely underground. The other one was like 3/4 of the way underground. And I said to him, I said, Dad, we need to get this. We need to get the sand back. We need to get this stuff back. So he and I used to take my jet pump, and every now and then we would go down there to the water and we would jet through the muck and blow sand up on top of the muck. And his theory was that if we do this enough, the sand's going to overtake the muck and we're going to end up with sand again. Well, I was It's like, Dad, let me just send a couple dump trucks down to Brandywine, pick up some white sand, bring it down here, and I'll make you a beach. And we won't have to do this no more. I'll take my bobcat, spread it all out for you, and then we'll let the high tides and everything, sift it out and make a nice beach. Can't do that, federal law, son. You can't do that. You can't do that. Well, my father was big on laws and all this stuff, so it's like, Dad, nobody will know. We'll do it on a weekend. It'll all be fine. Nobody will get no trouble. If they do, I'll take care of it. Nope, can't do that. Can't do that. So my father took my mother to the Pocono Mountains for a week, and I brought 2 truckloads of white sand down to his beach, dumped them, took the bobcat, spread it all out, made a nice beach. He came home and couldn't believe it. Now, we had a floating pier that came off of this little kind of bulkhead thing I built. Had a floating pier out there, and he went down to that pier, and I had sand out there, and with the tides, had drug some of the sand out even farther, and for about 4 foot deep, you could see the bottom again because the sun was reflecting the white sand. And my dad was like, "What did you do? We're going to be in trouble." We're not in trouble, Dad. Everything's fine. It's already done. And he's like, "What'd you do?" And I said, "Dad, I didn't do nothing. It was a storm, a freak storm. I guess all the jetting must have fixed it. It's everything's cool now. It's all good." He was nervous. I was not. I didn't care because I knew that what we were doing was right. Now, I didn't know at the time we were saving the bay. I just knew that we were getting rid of the muck so that we could use our beach. Well, as it turns out, the herring starts showing up at our shoreline. We've always had more ducks because we don't have the bulkhead up real high. They could get into the water real easy and come back out and everything. We always had more crabs because they could come all the way up. Next thing you know, cattails start growing in the corner. And this real fine seagrass starts growing, and the herring got to the point to where we built them little platforms off of the floating pier so that they could stand on that and fish, because they could see the shadows of the fish much easier with the sand on the bottom. About 3 years go by. My father's taking pictures of herring from up off of the deck, and he's got this photo lens and all this crap, and he loves it. It's great. About 3 years go by, and they decide they're gonna dredge the bay, and they're gonna dredge some of the creeks, and our creek was one of them. I'm up at my parents' house, and I look down by the boats, and I had a sailboat down there, and I look down at the boats, and I'm like, there's people on canoes that are canoeing all around our pier and stuff, and what's going on down there? So I go down there, and there's a bunch of people from the University of Maryland, and evidently they're biologists and shit like that, students. They are logging all the different seagrasses and mapping out where things are growing and where things aren't growing. And I went down there, and I'm like, "What are you guys doing?" And they told me. And they said, "Who planted your seagrass?" And I said, "Ducks." And they said, "Who?" And I said, "Ducks. Ducks planted the seagrass, and herring, and some other type of fishing birds. I'm not really sure. They planted it." And they're like, "Do you realize that you have 2 species of grass here that are endangered in the state of Maryland?" I said, "Is that right? Good. That's good. Leave us shit alone." And they said, "Well, we want to know what you did." And I said, do you guys know what killed the bay? Do you have any idea what killed the bay? And they're like, yeah, well, there's all kinds of problems at the bay. How do they start talking about pH? They start talking about farms and all that shit. And I said, you all are completely wrong. You've got a lot of education, but this is a common sense problem. And here's what happened. They killed the seaweed. And when they killed the seaweed turned black. It turned the whole bottom of all these creeks and rivers black. Now, in the 6th grade, I learned about photosynthesis. You can't regrow seaweed or seagrass or any of that kind of stuff unless you can get sunlight down to the bottom where it's going to grow. And if the bottom's black, you can't do it. So, the white sand gives the reflect. The ducks and the cranes come from that little cove over there, and I wouldn't go over there because that old man's eyesight is not good anymore, and he will shoot you. So stay the hell out of his cove, because he's the only one that saved this area. He's the only one that even thought to save it. You know, that had the power to say, the buck stops right here, or I'll put buckshot in your ass. And they were all looking at me like I lost my damn mind. Like, you know, hey, we're going to PhD and start talking about oysters and all this bullshit. And I said, you're wrong. You're barking up the wrong tree. You're talking to a guy who you just told me that I've got 7 different kinds of grass growing. And you're very surprised because it's growing in front of my house. It's not growing anywhere else in the area, and 2 of them are endangered. And you're going to tell me about the chemical makeup and reaction and all that kind of crap that's making it to where this shit's not happening, and it is happening here. And I'm telling you, it's 6th grade science. It's photosynthesis. And if you were to somehow get rid of the black bottom everywhere and bring back the sand, the grass will regrow. But the problem is that the people are so self-centered. They act like they want the bay back, but they don't know that the cost is seaweed's going to smell at low tide. Their boats aren't going to be able to go everywhere they want them to go. And they're going to have to give up things in order to live with the nature that they came down here and so desperately wanted. But as soon as they got here, they killed it so that they could have fun. And they just couldn't believe it. I'm looking at like 12 people on 4 different canoes or 5 different canoes, and I could see there was a couple young ones that looked like they might have got it. But I can guarantee you if they use those answers on the tests, they'd fail. Because the ones with the PhDs that were telling them, you know, it's indigenous grass, yeah, their ego and their science was way too far gone for them to listen to some dumbass dirt guy that grew up there and didn't have the education and all that. So, if you want proof that what I'm telling you is true, find some aerial photographs of the bay, creeks, and rivers, preferably on the western shore side. So that's the side I'm talking about. From the 1960s. and you will find farmland everywhere. And these were till farms. They weren't worried about the sediment, other than they didn't want their topsoil disappearing. They didn't worry about putting the fertilizer down and it going into the bay or anything. Wasn't the problem. Look at those aerial photographs, and then look at the aerial photographs in the early 80s. And the difference that you're going to see is the paths that the boats used to channel on became the entire creek wide. And it was the herbicides that they paid people to contaminate the water with and kill the seagrass so that they could have big fun with their Donzies and their sailboats, because they were too lazy to motor their ass out to the bay. Because once you got out into the wide Magathie, once you got out into the actual bay, you got out into 10 foot of water, and there's seagrass. You could boat all you want. It was just 4, 5, and 6 foot of water that they could use if the seaweed wasn't there that they wanted. And they killed the seaweed, and that was the filter of the bay. That was what filtered everything that came off, the runoff, the sewage, everything. Seaweed was the filter, and they took the filter out. If you take the filter out of an aquarium and then just let it go for a while, see what happens. Especially if you have a lot of fish in it, and you're not even talking about runoff from cars or boat motors or anything like that. But that's what happened. And the only way to fix it is you have to drop a pipe or something, suck the muck out, replace the muck with white sand, and just keep checkerboarding the area until the seagrass picks back up. That's how to save the bay. I can draw you plans. I can show you how to do it, and I've done it, and I know it works. But don't listen to me. I'm just a dumb dirt guy.